Excellent, excellent. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so pleased that you could take the time to join us today on this panel discussion on resilience. We have over 200 participants registered for this event across over 50 companies. So thank you all very much for taking the time out for this. Before I introduce the panel, and before I ask everybody who's on this call a question in the chat function, I'd like just to explain a bit about what is resilience and why are we discussing this today. So resilience is a bit of a buzzword in our modern world, even more so given the time that we're in now with COVID-19 and the different challenges that it is currently presenting us, which we're likely to continue for some time. So I think it's important to recognize that resilience is not about not feeling or not being able to feel or being impacted by events. Resilient people experience the full range of emotions. They feel the impact of events. They get sad, they get angry, frustrated, disappointed, afraid. But the difference is that they don't stay there very long. Resilient people have the ability to bounce back more quickly from the events that they experience.
I think we may have lost Gina, have we?
Somebody keeps muting me. That might be a bit of a problem. So I'm just going to try to keep talking now. Sorry. Hopefully you could all still hear me.
Yes.
So resilient people have the ability to bounce back, as I was saying, much more quickly from the events that they experience. So today our panel are going to help us explore how we can build and maintain our resilience and support our teams, colleagues, family, friends to do the same. So before I introduce the panel, let's familiarize ourselves with the chat function. So here's a question. Give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, sideways, or use an emoji, or even just use a couple words. But how would you describe your resilience? So for those of you who can use chat, please take a moment now to find the chat, and I'll bring it up as well. And I'd love to see how would you describe your resilience? Oh, Claire. Oh, room for improvement, super variable, robust, dynamic, good, pretty good, rides the ups and downs, good up to a point that non-existent, good, thumbs up, very good, strong, bad, pretty robust. Oh, they're coming in fast and furious. I can't keep up. There's a penguin. Pretty good in the circumstances, pretty good, strong, could be on the edge. Oh, somebody's on the edge. Low this week. Yeah, wavering, mixed. Yeah. Depends on the hormones. Steady, good, mostly good, flexible, depends on the situation. Absolutely. Good. Great. So quite a range, which makes sense, right? Some thumbs up, steady. Excellent. Thank you all so much for sharing. It's really nice to know where we are and that it's not always for each of us. So hopefully each of us will take away something from this panel today and help figure out how to make it better when needed. So thanks for that. Okay, so let me introduce the panel. So first we have Jacqueline Russell. She cites her resilience as being the factor that allowed her to excel within each of the very extremely different environments that she worked in. She started, I didn't realize this, Jacqueline, as a classical ballet dancer. And then she went into have impactful work with the Welfare to Work, followed by the intense environment of mergers and acquisitions, and now in the skills education and training. And I think, as she said, and we talked about, this diverse experience helps her build self-belief and resilience in others. So really pleased to have you, Jacqueline. Thank you so much for being on the panel today.
Thank you.
Thanks. And then we have Jane Shannon. She's Corndel's Chief of Staff, about 20 plus years of experience in operational public sector, working as a midwife, frontline prison officer, up to prison governor in Her Majesty's Prison Service, to supporting 48,000 staff with their development needs in our courts and tribunals, service as head of L&D before moving to a FTSE 100 company. So thank you so much, Jane, for providing your expertise today as well.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. Next, we have Teresa Roberts. Teresa is a qualified coach with a particular interest in resilience. She is living proof that resilience can be learned because having been a pessimist, a perfectionist, and a born warrior until her late 30s, she realized how debilitating it was, and she was determined not to pass that legacy on to her children. So she began a process of self-development to shift her mindset, which continues today, and she happily describes herself as an optimist. And I know Teresa quite well, and I absolutely agree. She's very optimistic. Her personal journey eventually led to her career change to coaching, and now loves to support others through their own process of discovery. Thank you for joining us, Teresa.
Hi, everyone.
And finally, we have Tina Tilmuth. She is trained as a counselor and psychotherapist and taught on the subject of resilience, as well as having a private practice. She's also written textbooks for healthcare workers, all of which require some knowledge of caring for mental health within the care setting. One book in particular addressed mental health, and as she commented to me the other day, all healthcare workers require a measure of resilience. So welcome to all of you on the panel today. So there's some questions that came through in advance, which is great from the participants. Thank you very much. So we put together some of the themes that have developed from those questions. And I just want to ask the panel some of those questions first. And then I'd also like you on the phone to think about what questions you have and to be asking them in the chat. If the chat doesn't work, then there will be time for you to come off mute and ask your question. But for right now, I'm just going to ask the panel some questions directly. So Tina, if we could start with you, Tina, what clues are there that your resilience is being impacted?
Definitely feeling very, very down, very overwhelmed by things that are going on. And what we call in counselling and psychotherapy is catastrophizing. That sort of inner dialogue that, you know, a slight, you stub your toe and suddenly that's going to lead to all sorts of really, you know, you're going to end up with that toe dropping off, or you send that sort of vibe out that everything is bad. This is a whole, you know, gamut of emotions that you're going through. So yeah, feeling very overwhelmed by everything and not being able to cope.
That's really interesting, Tina, because I like your what would it be, a metaphor or simile? I always get them mixed up about the you know, you stub your toe and all of a sudden it feels like the world's ending and your toe is going to fall off. It's a really, I guess it's a really nice reminder that something's wrong. And you need to really be in touch with yourself and your body to understand when there's a dip or your resilience is being impacted.
Definitely.
Thanks, Tina. Jacqueline, how about you? What clues are there that your resilience is being impacted?
So for me, I really kind of, for me, I view, or when I feel resilient, I'm feeling like I have a really, ooh, there's a return on that. Can anyone hear that?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
This is when you dive into the...
I don't actually think that's my phone because I just muted myself and it's gone. It's not gone. Maybe if everybody else mutes themselves, I think there might be someone who's not muting.
You know, no, you just get all these... And they're a panel,
No,
and
that actually sounds like a fire alarm.
I'm going to ring off.
Is there a way we could mute everybody?
Oh. Okay, so I'll go back. There we go. That's a relief. That was a painful noise. Oh
no.
Don't
Maybe
it's me.
Yeah,
Because we were speaking before, weren't we?
Jacqueline, if you could put yourself on mute, let me turn it over while we're trying to figure that. Let's see if maybe Teresa could answer that question if we're having the same technical issues.
I've come off mute. I don't think that's going to go.
Everybody.
Right. Has it gone?
I think we're safe, dare I say.
Okay. That's good. Shall I?
That's better. Go for it, Jacqueline. I think you're all right now.
So for me, resilient, when I'm feeling really resilient, it means that I'm feeling a consistent and positive purpose and a drive forward. So if I were to say that if I were to describe if my resilience were being impacted, I'd be feeling stuck, potentially demotivated, a lot less happy and strong with that drive forward motion. Potentially there'd be more negative self-talk, which normally, if I was feeling really resilient, wouldn't be there. And I think that if you're losing resilience, you might be potentially feeling like there's that loss of the kind of broad perspective of why you're heading in a particular direction, or whether or not you have the capability of moving forward through whatever it is you're facing. So I feel like potentially you know that resilience might be being impacted when you're feeling stuck and powerless, basically, and not really feeling like you have too much control over what's happening around you. That's how I feel. Yeah.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Thank you. It's that feeling of just being out of control, and hopefully, and I know today we'll find out some tools and techniques to help us get out of that mindset and step in. It seems to me from the clues that they all come within yourself, and I wonder sometimes if you don't see it in yourself, how else are you going to get out of that lack of resilience? And it's almost like, do you need somebody to acknowledge it for you? Somebody else to come in and say, you've been in this rut for quite some time. What do people on the panel think about that? If you don't see it yourself, how else do you know your resilience is being impacted?
Well, one thing I think is that if you can't recognize it in yourself, it's going to be pretty hard if you're a manager to be able to support your team to, regain their own resilience to move forward. So I think it's possibly a pretty important thing to have felt yourself, both feeling as though your resilience is there and also feeling it being kind of impacted, so that you can learn that it's something you can recognize, it's something you can learn and rebuild, so that you're able to help support your team with that belief as well.
Yeah, definitely. That self-awareness is really, really key here. Excellent. Thank you both. Teresa, one of the questions we have for you as well as for Tina are, what are some of the tools and practical ways to build resilience?
Yeah, so I think I've explored all sorts since that sort of time in my early 30s, but I think there are probably 3 core things I think that are worth sharing, kind of that started my journey. And the first was to realize, sort of coming back to what Tina was saying, there are sort of the facts of what's happening. So there are certain facts that are occurring around us, but the way that we experience life and the way that we see the world and the reality that we create is unique for each of us. And I think that hit home for me when I miscarried my first child. So my husband and I were both devastated when it happened, but a few weeks later, and his world looks very different to mine. So he wasn't, assuming this was always going to happen, and he wasn't blaming himself, and he wasn't feeling that this had undermined the whole of the rest of it, of the joy that he had. So, but I very much was, and I kind of, you realize that actually it's not so much the facts of what's happening, it's how we're interpreting them, it's the thinking process that we're going through. And via that, I came to Martin Seligman's work on learned optimism and discovered that pessimistic thinkers do exactly that. So there are 3 things they will do. They will assume it is personal always. So they will blame themselves, and not so much behavioral blame, but kind of more global blame. So I am useless. I've always been rubbish, those kind of explanatory statements. And they will assume it's permanent. And so they project it out into the future. So that leaves you feeling quite helpless because there's nothing you can do to change it. And they will assume it's pervasive. So it's not going to undermine the whole of their lives. So you can go, I used to be able to go from, having a shocker car crash of a presentation at work through to, well, that's it. My boss is never going to trust me to do this again. I'm useless at presentations. I'm never going to get, promoted, or I'm never going to move on in my career. And worse still, when, the next round of redundancies, I bet I'm going to be the one who's going because I can't do any of this. So that comes to Tina's point about catastrophizing and kind of exploding it from this one event outwards. And so Martin Seligman's work includes a lot of really useful tips around disputing all of that thinking. So kind of arguing with yourself, really, well, what's the evidence for this? what's the evidence to the contrary, actually? You know, is this interpretation accurate? What other possible explanations are there? So you can learn to dispute that explanatory style, and that will start, you know, the more you do it, the easier it comes, if you like. So that was the first thing. And then I think there's some compassion for yourself as well. Our self-talk is, you know, for some of us is shocking. And that doesn't leave you feeling particularly resourceful. If you are constantly telling yourself how useless you are and so on, that's not great for being resilient. That's not great for being able to pick ourselves up and carry on. And so I think the rule of thumb we should all follow really is if we're not willing to say that to a friend or our kids, because we know how damaging that will be to their self-worth and to their self-belief, then we really need to switch that up for ourselves as well and have some compassion for ourselves in the same way that we do for others. And then the final thing, I think, sort of the first sort of set of tools, if you like, was the idea of the circles of concern and influence and control. So Stephen Covey wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he advocates, you know, you have this circle of concern, all the things that we are bothered by, you know, in our lives and in the world and so on. And then we have this, you know, within that, we have what we influence and what we control. And if we spend a lot of time worrying about all of the things we don't control and we can't influence, that's going to leave us feeling, you know, as a victim and helpless to do anything. So, for example, I was diagnosed with a long-term condition. Now that's rubbish news, right? And it could have serious repercussions. But rather than doing that whole catastrophe thing and looking at all of the stuff I could be concerned about that I can't change, I focus it back down on, well, what do I control? And that allowed me to do some research, to make some decisions over, you know, how much pressure I'm willing to take at work, the kind of diet that I have, and all of those kind of things that now help. So I think making sure you're focused on what you can influence and control makes you more resourceful, because optimistic thinking is about thinking resourcefully.
Great. Thank you so much, Teresa. There was so much in there, and I was taking copious notes. So I just want to emphasize a couple of the things that you mentioned. Learned optimism, and remind me, Learned Optimism is by Martin Seligman. Learned optimism, definitely a great thing to check out. And what I love about this is it's not just about resilience in work or resilience in your personal life. Resilience is what it is, and it's so applicable no matter which way you look at it. And the same thing with Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, with Teresa, what you were describing as the circle of concern, influence, and control. Such a great tool to have, and easily to, you know, put it on your wall somewhere if you feel that you need something to kind of remind you of what is in your circle of control and influence. Great. Thank you so much, Teresa, for all those insightful tidbits. And by the way, we do have Heidi Marshall from Corndel taking very copious notes, and she'll be writing up a document based on everything that is being provided by the panel. So don't feel that you need to be writing quickly, or if you miss something, we will be writing it up and putting it on our website shortly. So Tina, what about you? What are some tools and practical ways that you would recommend to build resilience?
I can only go with what Teresa said. I was going to also look at Martin Seligman's work, but if you think about it, people who are resilient have a positive outlook on the future. And if we can just, you know, sort of think of that optimism, that can have such a huge effect on us. Looking at bad events as temporary rather than permanent, that's one thing that I often think about. You know, it's a fleeting thing. Okay, today was a rubbish day, but tomorrow is going to be much better. And I think this inner self-talk as well. When it's negative, we start to explain to ourselves the setbacks in a negative way. So we've had a bad day. I didn't get as much done as I could have done today, and therefore I'm rubbish, and I'll always be rubbish because I've always been rubbish. So actually blaming ourselves isn't a useful resilience technique. So resilient people actually view a difficulty as a challenge. So if we can start to think about that, you know, we've had a bad day, what can we do to make it better? They look at their failures and their mistakes as lessons to be learned from. So it's that whole that NLP strategy, you know, there's no such thing as failure, there's only feedback. And I think that's a really good point to take away as well. And resilient people actually spend time focusing on situations and events that they have control over, as Teresa said. If we start to try and worry about things that we have no control over, that's when you're going to feel lost and helpless. So it's making that distinction. It's actually thinking, okay, what can I control here? I've got a great example of somebody that I knew whose husband died. Terrible, terrible event for her, but she spent months and months thinking, why me? Why did it happen to me? Why me? And then somebody said to her, well, why not you? And she was stunned by that response, because it made her flip her thoughts and think, yeah, why not me? Why am I feeling so persecuted about something that's randomly happened? It's unfortunate, but I now need to move on with that. So it sounded like a brutal response to her why me discussion, but it made her change her thinking and to think about, actually, I'm not going to be persecuted by this anymore. So it's just a thought. It's, flipping and getting a different frame of reference from negative to positive, from pessimism to optimism.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Tina. It's a perspective, right? It's changing that perspective, getting into that hopefully growth mindset. And how could we look at it from different angles and not just the one that we're kind of stuck in and feeling, and therefore that ability to bounce forward. Jane and Jacqueline, thinking about how people are feeling overwhelmed in different ways. Workload is the same, for example, for some people, and they're expected to pick up perhaps the work of furloughed employees. Just one example of how people could be feeling overwhelmed. We are working in some small spaces. Perhaps we're living alone, or we're living amongst a lot of other people and trying to work in the same space at the same time. So a lot of people, feeling really overwhelmed now. So Jane, I'll start with you. What are some different strategies that you would recommend to people that feel overwhelmed?
I think the thing with being overwhelmed, so if I use the practical analogy of both of my careers of a midwife and prison service, quite often you end up putting yourself into a situation where you are out of control, because obviously things can happen which are completely unpredictable in those types of environment. So the strength and the tool that I would say you need to do is basically, first and foremost, is to take a breath, and then to think about and draw upon the strengths that you already have, because they do not desert you in that type of environment. So we might well be working from a very small room, or a room that's shared with others, all wanting the laptop at the same time. But what we've got to think about is if one of our skills is organisation, is coming up with a plan of how to make that work in a very practical sense. So these are going back to your strengths and then starting to apply them to the very different circumstances and environment that you find yourself in. Picking up on something that Teresa was saying earlier is that I've also got a tendency, or I used to have, of actually being quite pessimistic. So when you start thinking and you know that you've got that trait, what you have to do as well is manage the time that would be your pressure points. So when you break for lunch at home, if one of your pressure points that's going to make you feel anxious is to sit and watch the news, then don't watch it till the end of your day, and just watch it once a day, rather than take in all of that information and just feel overwhelmed by it all. Simple practical things like that is about managing your time, and I think the majority of us wouldn't be where we are today without having some skills and some strengths in being able to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jane. It's all about your strengths, in what I'm hearing you describe, and draw upon those strengths and use them to your advantage. I think it's so important to do like a values exercise, where you get really in touch with who you are as a person, what are those skills that you have, and then you could, like you said, draw upon them and apply them differently into different situations. And exactly what you're saying too about know your pressure points. Know that you shouldn't perhaps watch the news at certain times of the day because it's going to bring you down, in that example. So great. Thank you. It's really great practical advice, Jane. How about you, Jacqueline? What are some things that you would recommend?
So For me, I mean, similar to Jane, I have a few of the similar points, but so in terms of helping people come out of an overwhelming situation, or feel that genuine feeling of overwhelm, I think it's really important to try and focus on shorter term goals. So if you're in an overwhelming situation whereby someone's very loud there in the background, I'm not sure if everyone could mute themselves. That's definitely not coming from me, that noise this time. It wasn't me last time either, I don't think. But so focusing on the short term, so whatever the case may be, it's really difficult to think forward to the future. But actually, if you can think, I'm feeling very overwhelmed right now, but I'm going to focus on just getting towards the end of the day or getting towards the end of the week, or however it makes you feel slightly more comfortable, and not letting your mind wander too far into the future, where there may be, particularly in this circumstance, many unknowns, not knowing maybe about your teams being furloughed, not knowing whether your job is safe, not knowing when lockdown will shift, whether your partner, whether your finances will be okay. There's, trying to stop your mind wandering into that future will help you to stay grounded. And I think very much along the lines of what has been said before about really making an active choice to think positively in this exact moment. What can, if you could stop and just think of course you'll already know or be very aware of what the negatives are that may be impacting you, but what can you think of 3 positives of the overwhelming situation that you are faced with? For example, this is if you haven't been furloughed, you may be thinking, I'm really grateful to have the assurance that I have my job now. Or if you have been maybe you're going through a difficult time and you're having to manage staff at the same time, it's an amazing set of skills that you're able to take forward to an interview perhaps, and to be able to talk about, and it's something that's helping you grow stronger. Try and think of some of the positives that the situation is actually providing, so that you're not solely focusing on the negatives. I think that again, it's important just to try and find an hour. If you're overwhelmed by too much work, it's pretty difficult to find an hour. But if you can find an hour just to sit back away from whatever is causing that feeling of overwhelm, just to try and gain some space and gain some perspective to think about what your options are, why you're feeling the way you are, what do you have control over, what can you actually put in place in terms of making mindful choices, in order to give yourself that bird's eye view and then give yourself a space to think of the plan. And when it comes to work, in terms of maybe being very overwhelmed by that, I think everyone's probably aware of Covey's matrix, whereby you categorize the tasks that you have to do and break it down under what's urgent, what's important, what needs to be done now, what can be put off. But also, I think if people are really honest with themselves and not protective by ego over these are my tasks and I don't want to hand them on, but genuinely think about what you can delegate and share at this point. And my final point really is about whether or not obviously this is a crisis situation if we're thinking about coronavirus, and all companies are operating, at a particularly different kind of pace at the moment. But have you communicated with your line manager about how you're feeling? And it sounds like such an obvious thing to say, but I think, sometimes managers may be under the impression that I can just give work and give work and give work and give work, and actually that person's going to pipe up when they can't cope anymore. So if your manager or whoever's above you is thinking that, but you're thinking, well, they should see that I'm under pressure, I think you have to kind of just work out, how you're feeling, and just check in as to whether or not you've actually communicated when you're at that point that you feel like you're completely overwhelmed and can't really continue at that same pace.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Make sure I'm not on mute myself here. Really, really great point. It's that positivity. It's that having that optimism, and you can learn it. Thinking, what are the 3 positives that you could take out of really any situation? And I think it's knowing yourself too. If you know that you're more going to kind of dig a hole and just lie in it and try to bury yourself, as opposed to going out and talking to somebody. about the need to be more resilient, or, that you're feeling overwhelmed. So sometimes I think it's doing the reverse of what we typically do and trying to get ourselves out of the situation. Really great input, Jacqueline. Thank you. We do have some questions coming through now, and actually it ties in very nicely to the last question that I particularly had for the panel through the questions that came in advance. So I'm going to ask that now, and also please put some questions in the chat, because we're here for you. We want to hear what questions that you have on your mind. But the last question for Teresa and then Jane are, what are the best ways to share these tools with someone in the team who may be feeling less than resilient right now?
Yeah, so I think once once you know what works for you, or you've explored some of the tools perhaps that we've talked about today, it's entirely possible to share any of those with others, whether they're at work or outside of work. But I think there's a crucial step before that is so important, and you have to meet people where they are. They need to believe that you get their world and that you understand where they are, and and feel that relatedness, if you like, because if I'm at the bottom and I don't believe that you can see it the way I see it, and I don't believe that you understand how it looks to me, then anything that you come to me with will probably get instantly rejected, because you don't understand. Anything that you suggest, anything that you say is not going to be relevant to me. So there'll be a barrier. So I think it's entirely possible to use kind of Martin Seligman's work, for example, in a coaching style with anybody, but you really need to meet people where they are first. You need to have that empathy, and that might just be sitting with them and just listening, and never underestimate the power of being listened to. It is so useful, and quite often you probably the rest of us who are coaches on the call probably find this too. Sometimes you can sit there and you just listen, and somebody talks and talks and talks and talks, and then they go, actually, I know what I'm going to do, or actually I feel better. So never underestimate that, and just sit with it, sit with the sort of situation that they're in. Say, I can see how hard this feels for you right now. I get it. And just make sure you're meeting them where they are before you start sharing any of the tools that we've talked about today.
Yeah, it really has to be on their wavelength, as you're saying there, Teresa. And it actually came up in the chat just a minute ago about how do you avoid relentless positivity? In other words, things aren't always okay, and your team sometimes needs to hear that too. And the question on, well, how do you balance that?
I think it's a really important point, and just picking up on that and taking that forward a bit, it's okay as well, in a positive way, to share with the team how you're feeling. I think quite often as a leader, we're expected to do everything perfectly and be absolutely fine, 100% every day. And that is not going to be the case. We've all had down days. We've all had days where we really struggle to think about what we can achieve. So I think it's also important to maintain that honesty and integrity and trust, to actually share that and say, do you know what, last week I was feeling pretty rough that day about this situation. I was wondering when it was ever going to end. So this is what I decided to do. And I think being honest with the team as well, to say that work patterns will change, and people will find that because they're working in a very different environment, their productivity is going to be very different, is okay too. So reset the boundaries of your team and make sure that they understand that if they actually work better first thing in the morning, then it's okay to do that. Or maybe it's later in the evening, particularly if they've got young ones running around and they want to make sure that they're also giving them time through homeschooling. So coming up with those practical reflections, if you like, of how you're experiencing things, gives people an insight that actually others might be feeling the way they're feeling. So you're not trying to sympathize, but you are trying to empathize. A couple of really, really practical tips as well, picking up on what Teresa said, because I think it's really important that you've got to judge the timing right for the person that might be feeling less resilient. Is we've at Corndel, we've introduced a virtual coffee. And there's nothing wrong with you having a coffee to listen to somebody. You don't have to achieve anything from a work perspective, but taking the time to connect and to listen to somebody is really important. And quite often that importance resonates more when you set a separate time apart to do that. So that might be something that you want to use. And then the other thing that I'll say to people that's a practical tip on building on what Teresa said as well is that we've actually set up a resource bank at Corndel called Corndel Connect. And what we've done is we've taken some really good practical advice that's out there. So if I use homeschooling as the prime example, and also mental health and well-being, there's some really good resources that are out there from registered charities and also from places like the BBC Bite Size or the National Oak Academy for the homeschooling. And what we've done is we've literally taken those resources and dumped them into one area. So when people feel ready and they want to look at something around resilience, or they want to look at something around mental health and well-being, then the resources are there for them to access, and they can access them at any time. And you can start that chat room by putting the files in there and then just putting a note on there to say, hey, what do you think about this article? And start and generate a conversation amongst the team, because quite often people's insights, like with our chat room here that's running, people's insights really help, and it makes people realize they're not alone.
Absolutely, yes, we are not alone. I could see a lot of the chats coming through. Thank you very much, Jane, for that. I think you spoke about vulnerability and being open with people about how you're feeling when you've had perhaps a rough day or a rough go at it, and that honesty and really how the work patterns are changing in light of where we are in these extraordinary times right now. Productivity will absolutely change, and that it is necessary to reset the boundaries of the team. So really great advice. Thanks for mentioning Corndel Connect. I'm curious to hear a bit more about that, maybe in the chat, Jane, if you could let people know a bit more about that, our learners. And then finally about judge the timing of when you're having conversations with your team members. Excellent. So I have Natalie Kwan is helping me look at all of the chat. So Natalie, I'm going to turn it over to you. I see things in the chat. Would love for you to kind of find, are there some themes coming through? Are there some questions that you could ask the panel?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's definitely a common theme here of identifying what the panel have said in terms of the resources that they've used and how useful they've been. Some people have said that they've had a cycle of knee-jerk reactions because they've got so frustrated with the situation, but have since sought out help and also found what you guys have said really interesting. A few questions come in terms of how people can help their kids be more resilient when facing pressures in exams, GCSEs or A-levels, and how parents, how can they be more supportive? And also equally on the professional side of things, how do you explain to your manager that workload is too high without sounding defensive? And I'll throw that out to the panel, depending on who wants to take those two.
Shall I chip in on the GCSEs piece, given that my son has just had his GCSEs cancelled? I feel you. I realised that I saw the question in the chat actually, and I believe your child is sort of in their first year of GCSEs or A levels. So totally get it. It's been a real roller coaster for my son as well. So I think the things that we have done with him, and obviously you've got to judge, I would have an open conversation with them, talk about what what's their greatest fears, what's their greatest hopes. I think sometimes reassuring them is so important, that people they'll get caught up. They will get there. There will have to be some kind of adjustment. Everyone is in the same boat I think is important, particularly when you're isolated at home. One of the things I've noticed is, when stuff happens and we're not with our mates, it can feel much bigger and you can build it up, and you're not getting that interaction with everybody else. So reassuring them that it's okay. if you can, drop an email to the teachers. You know, if the teachers at your school are open to you flagging that, they should be. It's all about, you know, sort of personal development and welfare and so on, and that's all very important part of school. So if you can get any information from them, or just flag that, you know, your child's feeling the way they are, because I guarantee other people are. So I've done that recently, and we've had some great feedback from the school, and some reassurance. And yeah, so reassuring them, talking about, you know, looking at what their greatest fears are, and doing some of that kind of, well, is that, you know, is that real? Is that, you know, what other possible scenarios are there? What other possible explanations are there? And just, you know, that they are doing their best, you know, in some really difficult circumstances, and their best is by definition got to be good enough, because we can't do any more than that. We can continue to learn, but we are doing our best. And, you know, if your kids are sort of, you know, they've had their GCSEs or their A levels cancelled or whatever, the young people in your lives, yeah, just that sense that they've done all that they can, and whatever happens will be, you know, they will handle in whatever way is needed. There is always a way through. Nothing is the end of the world, or even the end of a journey, and so there are always solutions, always. I think when your school career builds towards this final point, it can feel like it's absolutely the end of the world, but it's so not. So, you know, we've been saying to my son, look, if the worst happens, this is the plan, you know, and in the meantime, keep going, keep engaging with school, and what will be, and we will handle it together. It will be okay. I don't know if that helps at all.
I imagine it's very helpful, Teresa. So thanks for that. And I'm sure if the person's one of our learners, they could feel free to also reach out to their PDE if they need some more guidance. Excellent. And how about from a work perspective? Natalie, you mentioned something that it was kind of two ways. It was about teenagers being more resilient, or helping your teenagers being more resilient. What was the other side of that as well?
The other side, from a professional point of view, is how would you guys approach your manager if your workload is too high without sounding defensive?
I mean, am I on mute? No, I'm not. I think
good.
it's Jacqueline. I think that, you know, obviously it's part of making sure that you prepare what you want to say, to make sure that you're not sounding whiny or anything. Like, make sure you're in a good state when you prepare what you want to say, and make sure that you're in a calm state when you communicate that message. I mean, ultimately, depending on your relationship with your manager, they should know you as a person and recognize whether, you know, the tone of your voice, or, you know, the way that you're acting is in line with what they would expect. So I think, you know, communicating the genuine feeling that's going on, and actually I think a lot of that comes into what's going on outside of your work life as well. I think now more than ever, it's really important to make sure that there's a bit of work-life balance there. And by the life part, I mean maybe connecting with friends, family, and all those additional stresses that homeschooling might have. But, you know, also having some time for health and well-being, very much so, and making the time to have a walk and eat healthily, and relax and sleep well. So I think, you know, by communicating the whole picture to a manager, it's going to come across, you know, they're going to feel and see the full picture of how you are. If you don't say to them, I'm so stressed that I'm not sleeping, they don't quite understand the impact of the work, and how it may be affecting you. So I think kind of trying to be as open and communicate as honestly as you can, but in a way that is really as calm as possible as well. It's obviously going to help the person who's listening not feel not feel as though they need to feel defensive at the way that you're speaking to them. And I think it's also a really good phrase to have up your sleeve in case you're feeling like you are building yourself into that that kind of emotional state you might feel if you're overwhelmed, is just to say, I'm really sorry, I'm not angry at you, it's just how I'm feeling in general at the moment. I don't have any time to process things, I'm not sleeping, and I really, you know how I feel about my work, I always do my best, I'm not sure how long I can keep doing this for. I feel like I've got a bit too much on my plate. I think being open like that will help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Jacqueline. It's so true. It's just like you're saying, you have to acknowledge it to the line manager, whomever you're speaking to. This isn't about you. I'm not angry at you. And I think just putting that in whatever ways that you feel are the best way of the words is to do that. And I think sometimes I think back myself to when I've had to have those types of conversations with people that I reported up to. It was more about, look, I don't want you to solve my problem. I just want you to listen, and kind of putting them in the role that you want them to have in that conversation, I think is really helpful as well, which is a lot of what you were saying as well, Jacqueline. So thanks for that. One question I picked out, I think, as I was going through the chat as well, Natalie, if it's okay with you, there's one I think that would be great for Tina on our panel to answer, and that's what signals should we look for to indicate that someone might need medical help beyond building self-resilience, especially when only meeting virtually? What are some of the signals, Tina, that we should be looking for?
Possibly withdrawing from, conversations, not answering questions, not being very engaged when you're on a call with them, perhaps. Avoiding calls as well, so maybe they're not coming to meetings. Stumped a bit there. I just think their whole demeanour will change. They won't look well. They'll look tired if you're on Skype, and you can demonstrate that. Yeah, go on, Teresa. You were going to say something, I think.
Oh, it was Jane actually. I was just
Sorry.
going to pick up on that, Tina, actually, and say, and another one I think is also is getting into the habit of encouraging people to put their camera on. If you're working remotely, it's really important to see how people look and how they're responding with their body language. So I think that's an important one as well.
I think also people not, they'll be saying that they're working every hour, they're not taking breaks. Those sorts of things would trigger to me something that I'd want to explore even further. Some of my students have been coming onto calls and they've been saying that they're working 12-hour days now. And you sort of think that 12-hour day at home equates to much more than a 12-hour day in the office, because in the office you have periods of respite, periods when you can go and have a chat with somebody, periods of when you can go and have a coffee somewhere. But if you're working 12 hours at home, you are invariably locked into your computer for that time and probably don't have that input, don't have that leeway to go and have a chat with somebody, to go and have a walk around the shops or something at lunchtime. So that to me flags up concern, and I'd be talking to them about that. I've spoken to lots of learners who've said that the work is coming in, but my thought is that work will continue to come in, that work will still be there, and your job will expand with the hours that you're willing to put in. So the more you're doing, the more that job will expand. I don't know if anyone else would agree with that, but they have to have an opportunity to switch off, and you have to have an opportunity to say, actually, I am going to leave my desk at 5 o'clock tonight and not 9 o'clock as I have been doing. And I'm finding a lot of people are doing that. Their work is just increasing because they're allowing themselves to work more hours. They're using their usual commute time to do more work. So, there has to be a cut-off point. I think, as Jacqueline was saying, you do need to start to look at the work-life balance and think, right, okay, when do I switch off? When do I turn the email off? When do I stop answering calls?
I agree.
It is
with
within
Tina.
our control. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Jacqueline. It was that,
Well,
Jacqueline. One quick thing, and then I'm
yes.
going to have to move
Go
us
ahead.
on.
Oh, I was just really in line with what Tina said. I really think that making that decision to turn your computer off, having that discipline, and it can be really hard when you're stressed and you feel like you don't have enough time in the day to kind of move forward and actually, make those choices that you wanted to make. But this isn't new, but the question that you can ask yourself is, will it make me feel better if I keep staying here at my desk? Is that going to help me move forward? If I'm really tired, I don't feel like going for a walk, but I said I'd go for a walk every day to get out. I don't feel like it. I'm tired. Yeah, but that's fine if you're tired. But will that help you feel better is that choice going to make you feel worse or better tomorrow or even today, and just kind of asking yourself that constantly to make sure that actually you're making the right choice. Will the extra glass of wine really help you tonight, or is it going to make it worse the next day?
Oh, are you talking to me on that one in particular, Jacqueline? I'm just
Myself.
kidding. So we have 5 minutes. I just want to wrap it up, and I'm going to ask the panel now. I just want to hear your last aha moments. What's your last tidbit for us to take away as listeners for today's call?
For me, it's Jacqueline. I really think that although this is more about overwhelm, but I think a really great way of coming out of overwhelm is to think about, okay, these are all the things I can't control. These are the things I can control. And what are the positives within this difficult situation? It sounds crazy and it sounds difficult. And you may think there are no positives, but if you challenge yourself or your team who are in an overwhelmed state to think, what is it that's going really well right now, and what are any positives I can draw from this exact difficult situation? I really think that's powerful. I mean, I've used it myself, and it's really helped shift my perspective. That's my kind of biggest takeaway, I think.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Jacqueline.
It's Jane now. I was just going to say, for me, I think it's about having a plan. So
Jane, if you could, Jane, if you could speak up just a little bit.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry, I think my mic's moved. Is that better?
There we go. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I think for me, it's having a plan. As Jacqueline said, we're working in very different environments now. So think about how you work best and how you draw on your strengths to work best. And also think of those around you. So don't be sending an email at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon expecting a response, but also think about the person that you're sending it to and the pressure it puts on them, and actually whether that's going to spoil their weekend. So do sit down and work through what your working day would look like. I think somebody had mentioned in the chat about working alone. If you're working alone, space out your calls. Think about the fact of who you would like to call in the morning and who you'd like to call in the afternoon, so that you have got that interaction and you have got that opportunity to have a chat as well as get some work done. So practical ways of building your plan for your working day will feel and make you realize actually how much you can achieve, even on a day where you're feeling less resilient in yourself.
Great. Thank you so much, Jane. Words of wisdom. Teresa, how about you? And then we'll finish with Tina.
Yeah, so I think 3 words. I think curiosity. So stay curious about, the kind of reality that you're creating, the thinking that you're doing, where your feelings might be coming from and what might be driving those, and stay curious about, your teams and what's going on for them, and listening really well to them. Compassion, be compassionate towards yourself, talk nicely to yourself, recognize your own value and your own strengths. I loved Jane reminding us of that earlier, and have compassion for others too at the moment. And courage, have the courage. It is important. People are talking about overwhelm and actually pushing back a bit and saying, I really want to do my best here. This is just too much, and this is what I need. Have courage to reach out to someone who you can just download on, but don't suffer alone. Don't suffer in silence. That's so important. It should be just as natural to talk about this kind of thing as it is about anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Teresa. And Tina.
Yeah, and I will sort of add to that, the inner self-talk that we have, the voice that treats us either really badly or really well. I think we should be mindful of that. But let me just give you a little scenario. So there's a serious car accident and 2 people walk away from that car. They're fine. The driver gets out and says, oh gosh, I nearly died, and worries about that constantly, and that frames the way that person is going to be for the rest of their life. They nearly died in that car crash. Passenger gets out and thinks, wow, thank goodness I'm alive, and that also frames the way that they go on. Those people that view things positively do better. Those people that view things negatively constantly and harp back on those things do poorly. They don't have that resilience. So it's that inner self-talk, and it's that thinking about how we view events, either positively or negatively, that's really important.
Great. Thank you so much, Tina. I got so much out of this. It looks like a lot of people on the call did as well. I'm seeing a lot of really great thank yous and feedback. So please do share some more in the chat before you leave. We'll be just capturing that. And like I said, there will be a more formal write-up at the being done and posted, I'm sure, on LinkedIn, if you follow Corndel on LinkedIn, and on our website as well. So thank you all so much for attending. Really great to have so many people participate. And it is, I agree, it is nice to know that we're not alone in whatever it is that we're dealing with right now. Take care, everybody, and hope to see you next time.